We will now be recording. Okay, well, we are on the bottom of Yud Beis, Amud Beis. Being that I'm not going to be here Shabbos, I'm probably going to skip the Motzei Shabbos shir. I'm going to try to get home for Sunday morning. So Mitchum will be able to catch up to the daf by missing a daf. Sometimes we have to catch up by hurrying up. We'll catch up by missing Shabbos. The Shabbos will be a day of Chazar. Okay, so the last thing that we learned yesterday was the Brisa states that one of the Rosh Hashanahs that exists on Chodesh Tishrei is L'Nedarim, and that means when someone says, "I want to be Moeder Hana for this year," even if it was on Erev Rosh Hashanah, it's only his neder only lasts until Rosh Hashanah, and even though Nisan is the first month, nevertheless by Nedarim it all follows people's speech, and since normally people refer to the beginning of the year as Rosh Hashanah, therefore his Nedarim are dictated by that. Okay, now we are up to about 10 lines from the bottom. Tanan Hasan. Hatilson Misha Titzmach. Hatvua Vazesha Misha Viushlish. Our question here is, we had a cutoff date for Meiser, and the cutoff date we said was Rosh Hashanah. The question is, when is a plant or something that grows considered completed, so that if whatever stage we consider completion, if it occurs before Rosh Hashanah, it's from last year's crop, and then if it occurred after Rosh Hashanah, it's next year's crop. Now, besides Tilson and Tfu and Zaysim, there are many other things that also need to be discussed, what their cutoff date is, and we have to understand why the Brisa only focused on these two items. So Rashi tackles that right away. And Rashi says, let's just read another line in the Gemara so we're on Rashi in the right place. Tilson misha titzmach, it's some type of bean. Hatfu v'azeisim, grain and olives, mishaviu shlish, when they're 1/3 fully grown, 1/3 of being fully grown. My misha titzmach, by Tilson we said it means when it grows. What does that mean? So the Gemara misha titzmach lizroyim, when it grows for seeds, and we'll see Rashi how he explains that. And hatfu v'azeisim mishaviu shlish. So the Gemara wants to know how do you know this? So let's see Rashi. Tilson is a mint tavlin, it's fenugreek, it's some type of spice. Misha titzmach, achar shnas tzmichasai humisaser. Which year is considered its year for Meiser? The year that it grew in. V'lo achar shnas likitasai. It's not like vegetables where the year that they're connected to is the year that they were picked in. When there's already seeds inside it. I believe Tosfos looks differently. Tosfos quotes Rashi's second Tosfos on the Amud. Became Yerushalmi. However, Zok Tosfos the Yerushalmi doesn't seem to be mashma like Rashi learns. In Maishus Perakam Dami Meslisim Kedesh Tizra the Titzmach. It should grow. You should be able to plant it, and it should grow. So it has nothing to do with seeds. It has to do with it once it's able to grow on its own. How do you check that? Rabbi says, you take a kaimitz full, and you drop it into a container of water. If most of them sink, then they're chayev. I guess that means they're developed enough. So are you saying you're going to have to start now splitting hairs, literally the ones that sunk are developed, the ones that aren't? So it's mashma from this explanation in the Yerushalmi, meaning they're so ripened, they're ripened enough that if you would pick them now and plant them, they would grow. So it's two different approaches, one of Rashi, one of Tosfos, as to what this means. If you're going to plant Tilson, you need to get clear exactly what these things mean, so you'll know when you should be nice. Okay, now let's look at the Tfuah. The Tfuah, Rashi says, what is Tfuah? And again, this is a subject of a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Dagan v'tirosh kurim Tfuah. Grains, and tirosh was referring to both wine and oil, is called Tfuah. Tvuas Gairin uchasvuas Yaakov. Sorry, so Gairin is referring to the grain, and Yaakov is referring to the receptacle that catches the oil and the wine after there's a press. Vazeisim is called Yitzar. Mishiviu Shlish Misasrin Achar Shana Shagiba L'Shlish Bishulam. If you want to determine what year they're in, look at the year where they were 1/3 complete. Im Shniyam Shlishis, if it was the second year, it would be Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. Im Shlishis, it would be Meiser Rishon and Meiser Ag. The Gemara wants to know, how do you know that the shear for Tvua is Havashlish? So Rashi, Atvua Ba'Zeisim Kod. We're talking about Tvua and Zeisim. What's significant about those two? What's unique about those two? The Meiser the two Midaraisa. Those are Avachiv, Trumas and Meiser Midaraisa. We no longer Basa Shlish Azli. When the Torah said that these have a chiv meiser, the Torah is telling us when they're considered mature for the purposes of identifying what year they're from. How do you know that that's what the Torah is telling us? Zokt Rashi, what about Yerek? The Yerek, the Ozal Be Rabbanan, Basar Makita, Yerek, where the Rabbanan decided you just look at when you picked it, the Ilan or a tree, the Ozal Basar Chanata, there the Rabbanan have the option to pick whatever time makes sense to them, because Meiser to do midrabanan. All even Meiser of those products are only midrabanan, and therefore the Gemara here doesn't ask for a makar, because it's going to be a reason that the Chachamim picked and made sense, and we're going to see later on. Later on, the Gemara is going to explain the reasoning. Yerek, Mishum the Geizule Kol Shaita. Yerek, there's no specific time where Yerek is cut. They're cut all different times of the year. The other tzomach, and it grows back, and then you cut it down again. So therefore, it's hard to determine based on when it's cut, because they're cut all the time. That's one reason. The second reason is the gadol al megishavim, so it's not likitasei. Basically, by the vegetables, the water that it absorbs from the ground is what's sustaining it right now. There's no delayed reaction. So basically, it's nourishing from the ground live as it's growing, and therefore it makes sense to say that when you pick it, that's what it should be dependent upon. Therefore, so also by Elon, on the other hand, there's a delayed reaction. It's not like it rains and that rain goes right up into the fruits of the tree. Rather, Elon gadol al meishana shachanatba. The growth of a tree will all come from the water that rained, not now as it's growing, but the water that rained in the year that the fruits originally blossomed. Why is that? Because there's a lot of transformation happening in the tree. It's not the water directly nourishing the pears. The sap that's developed in the tree before the blossoming, it's that sap that was already in the tree, the Shasta Chanata, that sustains and helps the fruit grow until they're done. So therefore, Chanata is the important point of time. It's the sap that not water that comes right in. It's sap that I guess takes a little longer to develop. So the sap from before the Shas Chanata is what sustains the tree. So this is the reasoning why the Chachamim picked those times. But the Raisa ones, the Gemara wants to occur from the Torah. So Zok the Gemara, Omar Rav Asi, Omar Rabbi Yochanan. So we're like 6 lines from the bottom on Yud Beis and Beis. Umati Bei, Umatu Ba Mishmei Rabbi Yosy Aglili. And like we had a couple of blot ago, Umati Bei, some people divert the credit for this piece of information to Rabbi Yosy Aglili. They say Omar Kra, the pasuk says, very interesting pasuk. Nothing to do with Maisus. Miketz Sheva Shanim, B'moyit Shnas HaShmita. So let me read it inside the pasuk fully. Miktzei Shaloi Shanim. No, it's not over here. It's Daled. Here it is. Vayitzav Moshe Oisam Leimar. Miketz Sheva Shanim. At the end of 7 years, B'moyed Shnas HaShmita. On the Yom Tov of the year of Shemitah, the Chag HaSukkos on Sukkos. So this is very interesting, because Miketz Sheva Shanim means it's after the 7 years, which means you're in year 8. So, but it still says the Moed Shnas HaShmita b'Chag HaSukkos, Shemitah of Sukkos. But if we're in the Sukkos of year 8, we're not in the Shemitah anymore. So Zok the Gemara, Miketz Sheva Shanim b'Moed Shnas HaShmita b'Chag HaSukkos. Frank the Gemara, Shnas HaShmita, Maya Vidite. B'chag HaSukkah Shminasi. We're already in year 8. Eloloi Merlach. The pasuk is not trying to tell you what date you're holding in. The pasuk is telling you a chiddush in Hilchah Shemitah, and it's telling you that kol tfuah shaviyah shlish b'shviyas, any tfuah that grew 1/3 on Shemitah lefnei Rosh Hashana, before the end of Shemitah, before Rosh Hashana, atanoig ba minik shviyas b'shminas. Even on the 8th year, this tfuah is designated, is identified as tfuah of Shemitah, and that has all the restrictions of Shemitah that it's hefker. Let's see.
Where do we get the idea of 1/3? Why 1/3? Why not 1/2?
It's a very good question. That is mamish the subject of today's Gemara. Where do you get a third? Yeah, that's mamish the subject of the Gemara. And I don't know that we're going to get an answer that's going to make you happy, but at least the Gemara discusses it.
Okay.
There are certain things that are of the 8th year, such as this tfuah, that continue to grow in the 8th year. Nevertheless, it'll still be usher, it'll be treated like payers from Shemitah. And what are those? This is tfuah that had already grown 1/3 during the Shemitah year. Exactly, David's kasha. How do you see from this pasuk that has anything to do with growing 1/3? So Zok Gemara. How do you know that we're talking about tfuah shavil shlish? Maybe even if something grows fresh after Rosh Hashana, maybe we're talking about Tois V'Shmita. Maybe it's teaching you Tois V'Shmita, that you have to continue Shemitah until Sukkot, even if it didn't grow at all. There's Dr. Rashi. Even if nothing happened on the year of Shemitah. Maybe all the prohibitions that apply to Shemitah apply the year after, and that's what the pasuk is teaching us. It's not mistaber to say that the only most sensible understanding of the pasuk is to say that we're talking about tfuah shavil shlish. Why the muchach krachina? Because we're going to prove that from another pasuk. The Chsivit says the Chag HaOsif b'tzeis Hashana. So let's once again look at the pasuk inside. The pasuk says the Chag HaKatzir bikurim ma'asecha asher tizur basada. So that's referring to Shavuos, and then the Chag HaOsif, which is referring to Sukkot, b'tzeis Hashana, ba'asbecha is ma'asecha min hasada. So what's strange over here is it just identified it as Chag HaOsif. So it's just Chag HaOsif b'tzeis Hashana is ma'asecha min hasada. Why does it repeat the word ba'asbecha? We just said it's the Chag HaOsif. So Zok to Gemara. The Chag HaOsif b'tzeis Hashana. My Osif. What is the pasuk trying to tell us with the word Osif? If the Torah is just trying to identify that we're referring to the Yom Tov of Sukkot, it says a second later Baspacha. Elamai Osif Tzir. So what we have to say is the pasuk when it says the Chag HaOsif, it means Tzir. The Kimlu Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan know their science. The Chol Tvua Shenikser B'Chag, any Tvua that was cut on Sukkot, B'Yadua Shaviyah Shlish L'fnei Rosh Hashana. It must be that before Rosh Hashana it was grown 1/3. Because if it was not grown 1/3 by Rosh Hashana, there's no way it could be fully ripened by Sukkot. V'kakarila b'tzeis Hashana, and it's called b'tzeis Hashana, meaning it's attributed to the year before. Let's see Rashi. Chag HaOsif b'tzeis Hashana, my Chag HaOsif. Ilay medahu shem Sukkot. If the pasuk is just trying to identify what Yom Tov you're talking about, and we're identifying Sukkot as Sukkot because Sukkot occurs when you're gathering in your Paris. Why did the Torah repeat Chag HaOsif and Ba'aspacha on the same pasuk? So therefore, we're going to translate the pasuk completely differently, like a drasha. Elamai Osif Kotzer, the Chag Asher Hu Ba'aspacha Ma'asecha Min Hasada, the Chag of Sukkot, which occurs when you're gathering your things. Asif Asher Ata Koitzer Boy, the things that you gather, the things that you cut on that Yom Tov on Sukkot. We don't consider it as tvua from the year that you're entering. We consider it as products of last year. And whatever you cut on Sukkot is considered products of last year. So let's read this pasuk inside, completely different than the pasuk of Pshat. It says in the pasuk, the Chag HaOsif, the Chag, which Chag? The Chag of Sukkot, because later on the pasuk it identifies which Yom Tov it is. It's Ba'asbacha. So the Chag on this Yom Tov, if you cut HaOsif, whatever you cut on this Yom Tov, it says Hashana. Treat it like produce of last year. That's
What about
Gemara
what about the the sukkahs of the previous year, the products there?
So there you attribute to the year before as well.
Right, so they should be mutter then.
You mean if it's on the Shemitah year?
Yeah.
Well, maybe they are, yeah. They are. Oh, Mechi's telling us with certainty that they are.
Is that right?
Hektish doesn't double dip.
Okay.
The Kimlu Rabbanon, and so this goes to your question. The Kimlu Rabbanon, no, they make. Yeah, that's a difference. That's a question of Shvius. We learned you can't do it even a month before. But there's a big difference between, there's a big difference between planting and Toshis up on top makes that distinction. Okay. The Kimul Rabban the Chotvush and Nixera. The Chag B'Yedu Shavi Shlish Lefnei Rosh Hashanah. And the Rabbanon, no, they made that assessment. Rashi says the Kimul Rabbanon Sha'amru Hatvua Achar Shlish the Chol Tvua Shenexeres B'Chag B'Yedu Shavi Shlish Lefnei Rosh Hashanah. The Chachamim know their stuff. The Kakar Lebezesh Hashanah. Amar Rabbi Lebezesh. Rabbi challenge Rabbi. The Kimul Rabbanon Ben Shlish Lepachas B'Shlish. Are you telling me the Rabbanon are such scientists that they can tell exactly if it was a shlish or a drop less than a shlish? Amar lay. So look how Rashi explains the shaila. The Kimul Rabban Bitmiya B'Chibikin Hain B'Tiv Gidla Tfu. Are they such agricultural specialists? Ladash and Tfu Ru'uya Litzer B'Chag El Imkein Yevia Shlish B'Shana Shavra. Are they so sure about that? Amar lay. Ooh, Reb Zeir gave it back to Reb Yirmiyah. Lava Minlach. Didn't I tell you already? L'Safik Nafshach Levar L'Behilchaza. Don't pull your head out of anything than halacha. Don't mix into science. Because all the midas of chacham are with precision. But Rashi l'shavik nafshach bar meilchas lefakvek b'shir chachamim. Don't gribble in the shirim. Kol midasem kacham mitzam tennis. Their midas are with precision. For instance, barbam saw who toivel. You could toivel in barbam saw. Barbam saw chasar kurtiv. If it's missing a mashu, any yachal itvel ben. You can't toivel. That's very precise. Kebeya b'tamat masaychon. A kebeya is b'tamat masaychon. Kebeya chasar shumshum. If it's missing a hair. Shumshum means a poppy seed or sesame seed. So you see, there's very precision. The very precision assessments. If you have a baguette that's 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim, metama medrash. That's something that Chazal said you could sit on, and therefore it's metama medrash. But if it's missing even one thread, ain't metama medrash. So therefore, they make precise shiurim, and you shouldn't question.
I remember another Gemara where some Tana told Rabbi Akiva also to mind his own business with Tum and Tahara, not mix into something else.
That's not what he's about, right? Hadar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Lav Milsi, the army. Then Rabbi Yirmiyah said, "I said my kasha is not a kasha anyway." So Rashi, Lav Milsi, the army, Shekshesi, Loimar, Kimlu, Rabban, but just Lapach Mushlish. The Vada Kimlu. In fact, they do know. The Boim the Chavrai Merav Kahana, the Chavrai Ashraf Kahana, Oimer Shekribu Yisrael Bechnisas on La'aretz. Klal Yisrael came into Eretz Yisrael right before Pesach, and they were marking the first carbon omer on Pesach. Where did they get the wheat from to be marked the carbon omer with? Im timer the aisle biyad machri. If you're going to say that it progressed enough, that it was ripened enough, but this happened in the hands of the goyim. In other words, before Klal Yisrael came and took over the land, that wouldn't work. Kitzirchem amar achmon, but like tirnachri. It says in the pasuk about the carbon emiratius kitzurchem, umishiruya liktzar hikru ktzir. So therefore, if it was already royu liktzar in the hands of the goy, you wouldn't be able to use it for the carbon. Zok Gemara, mimai dakrivu, who said that they actually did bring the carbon emir the first year. Maybe they in fact didn't bring the carbon emir the first year because they didn't have wheat that they were able to cut. That's not logical to argue. They ate from the two of the land the day after Pesach. What's up if they waited till the day after Pesach? The only logical reason to make that distinction between Mimachas Pesach and before is that Krivu Aimer Ba'adachli. So back to our question, where did they get the fruit from? Amalahen, he told them, Kol Shaloi Yivi Hevi Shlish Biad Nachri. They found something that was they found something that even though it was almost grown, but it wasn't a via shlish yet, and therefore, when they took it over, it was a via shlish. It was close enough that it was ready to be cut down. Frank tomorrow, how do you know that? Based on my question where I asked, how did Chum know that? I'll ask the same question. Maybe their opponent didn't know. Ella must be that Kimlu. They were able to come in, assess the wheat, and know that this was a third, this wasn't a third. Therefore, here I can say Kimlu as well. If Kiveger has a big problem. Over there, the wheat was in front of them. They can look at the wheat and they can see if it's progressed enough. That maybe you can see from there. From Hechataisa, that they can give you a general assessment that any tfuah that you're able to count on Shavuos, that you're able to count on Sukkot, you automatically know is a via shlish. By the end of the year, that's a whole different assessment. To look at a piece of wheat and see, oh, this is developed enough, that's much easier to do than to make a general rule and say that you cannot cut something on Sukkot if it wasn't ripened by a shlish before. That's a much bigger stretch to say. So that's what Kiveger's kashis. He doesn't say tzarchin, but he points it out. Zok to Gemara. Maybe it didn't work at all. So Rashi, the Dilma Botku, Achamatsu Mitfua, maybe they didn't, maybe they're not such experts. They found really, really immature Tvua, and that way they didn't have to make a fine assessment between a third and not a third. But even if it already ripened a quarter of the way, maybe they wouldn't be able to make that fine assessment. So tomorrow, that's not either logical. The Chzivit says, they came up from the Yarden on the 10th day of the Chodesh, meaning they're only about 5 or 6 days away. And if you're going to say that it was completely immature, and we're only talking about 5 days before they need it, or 6 days before they need it, could it grow and become complete so fast that they can use it for carbon? Elamai, the Isle River, Oidanka. So what are you going to say? That it was somewhat developed, either a quarter or a sixth? Akati, still, I can ask the same question. I understand if it was a third, it could be ready to be cut on the day of the Omer. But if it's less than a third, how would it be ready? So how could you say that's the question and that's what they're making the assessment? What are you forced to say? That Eretz Yisrael plays by different rules. Eretz Tzvi Sivbei, referring to Eretz Yisrael as Eretz Tzvi. And Rashi says, what does Eretz Tzvi mean? Mat Tzvi Kal Baragla B'Kol HaChayis. Just like a deer runs faster than all the chayis. Af Eretz Yisrael Kala Levashel Perisah Michal HaRotzos. Things ripen fast, and therefore, even though it was immature, it will grow fast enough. Hachanami Eretz Tzvi Ksiva. So therefore, we don't have any raya whatsoever from the first carbon Omer, because maybe in fact they found two that was very immature, that didn't need any assessment, any bikiyas. It was way too immature, and it was still ready on time for the carbon Omer. So Rabbi Yirmiyah still had a kasha, and Rabbi Zeir told him you shouldn't ask kashas on shiur of the chacham. Maskal Rabbi Chanina, umi matzas amrit the high of tsiru. Can you possibly argue, like we just wanted to say pshat in the pasuk, that the chag asaf means on sukkahs anything that you cut will be treated like last year's products? Can you learn that pshat? Well, it says in the pasuk, and this is referring to teaching us what you make your schach out of. Amar Mar, the Torah is talking about teaching us what you make sukkahs out of. The reason why it's called is just to identify this is the Yom Tov of Sukkahs. That's one of the words to identify the Yom Tov of Sukkahs. So why are you reading into it that it's teaching you special halachas? That is the Yom Tov of Sukkahs. Let's see Rashi. Shalim decha kasav lasvei schach shel sukkah v'ptoilas garim v'yakum. Kigoyin. Examples of ptoilas garim v'yakum that you use to make your schach out of are kashin, zmurais, twigs, and stalks. Davar shein mekabel tuma, things that are not mekabel tuma, v'gidulim in aretz. Therefore, in our pasuk of Chag HaOsif, nami the garment Yisera, who you said it's an extra word, and that's why you wanted to make your drasha. Because we already know we're talking about sukkahs, because later on in the pasuk it already says that doesn't make it extra. That is the name of the Yom Tov. We're calling it that Yom Tov. Let me just finish Rashi. It's as if the pasuk would have said the Chag HaSukkos. So the Chag HaOsif could have said the Chag HaSukkos. It says Hashana. But Asbacham Ma'asecha Bizman she'adam oisef el habayis tvua shebesados. So really, sukkos is referred to using two words. The word sukkos is used to describe sukkos, and osef is used to describe sukkos. So maybe he's just calling it a name. So we're saying that the Yom Tov of sukkos, which is osef, is a name. The Yom Tov of sukkos happens to occur when you're gathering your stuff. It's an explanation for why it's called Chag Osef, but it's not a new halacha. So therefore, now we have a whole kasha, the whole premise. How do you know that up until Sukkot, anything you cut by Sukkot was ready before? There's such a good shot we had. We had Mamshak Ishmak Pshat, a dark brush from the Pasuk, and Chanina Shadabanag, and Chanina came and he blew up our whole Gabaltic Pshat, and now we're back to square one. Elam Inolam. So how do we know that if Tua grew a shlish before Rosh Hashanah, it's considered for the past year? It says, when we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how are we going to survive if there's Shemitah? So Zokt, the Pasuk, your Tfuah will last for 3 years. Al tricky l'shalish, don't read it l'shalish for 3 years. El l'shlish, make a drasha of l'shlish. Zokt Rashi, I mean. Ella, I'll take you l'shalish claimer asiyasa. It's considered as va'asis is a tfuah l'shalish onim. In asiyasa, when is it completed? When is it made? Kishu shlish bishula. So Zokt Gemara, how could you say that from Ibayla Lugufei? Don't we need it to teach you? Rashi says, Shuva al manoichel b'shon hashvius. You can't just make a drach out of this pasuk. This is irrelevant to the b'zak. So the Gemara, Ksiv Krachinas, we have another pasuk that tells us that we will last the 3 years. Because it was Ratim as Hashana Shminis. They'll be able to plant in the 8th year after Shemitah. But you'll be able to eat your tfuah that you planted in the Shminis won't be ready until the Chias, and therefore the Yosha, the tfuah that you planted in the 6th year, will last Hashana Chias. So therefore, since we have another pasuk that tells us this halacha, we can use the pasuk of Asas Tfuah L'Shalish Shanim to teach us this halacha that growing a third is considered made. No, the new Joshua, this is Mamish Droshes. Tanazim. Ha'eres, rice. Va'doichin is, I think, millet. Va'pregan, these are all different types of spices, grains. Shumshamin, I think those are poppy seeds. Sheshrishu l'pnei Rosh Hashanah. If they took root before Rosh Hashanah, mis'ashron l'sha'avar, they'll be mis'ashron l'sha'avar. So this is a new time that they made up. Hashrosha. If they took root, they're considered from last year. Umutarim b'shvius. And they'll be mutter b'shvius if it's Erev Shvius, so it's rooted before Rosh Hashanah. But if not in Asurim b'shvius, then we'll say that they're a product of Shvius. So it's all totally on Hashrosha, on when it takes root. Amar Rabbanan. The Rabbi says, where did you get the shear from? The Rabbanan said, Ilan Basar Chanata, and Tfu and Zaysim is Basar Shlish. So that we know, and we also know that Yerek Basar Lakita. But this is Nishtahin and Nishtaher. Hani Kaman Shavinu Rabbanan. Exactly what are they comparing this to? Where did they get this year? That's Rashi, Kaman Shavinu Shahol Bain Achar Shosha. Where did they get this from? Hadu Amar Rabba. Then Rabba came up with an explanation. And he said, Mitoich Shasuin Prechen. Therefore, Azli Rabbanan Basar Hashrosha. And Rashi says, what does it mean? Asuin Prechen Prechen. Mitoich Shagorino and Asum Ma'at Ma'at. When you harvest them, you don't harvest all of them at the same time. You don't pick them all at the same time like regular vegetables. Even in the same plant, you'll take some of these products, whatever they are, the spices. You take some today, and you'll come back tomorrow for more. You always want to keep it fresh. Yes, the list of these items. If you take some today and take some tomorrow, you're going to have Chodesh and Yoshem mixed together. Rav and Yachad and Nefrochen Lefnei Rosh Hashanah, Iman Nefrochen La'achar Rosh Hashanah. So Zokt, the Rashi, Im Hochen Ben Achal Akita, Kishar Yerek, if you would go Bashal Akita, like every other Yerek, Kishim Mavish Mashroisov, Havali Masim in a Chodesh Al Yoshen and in a Yoshen Al Chodesh. If you went Bashal Akita, since the Lakita is happening at different times in the same plant, it would get very confusing. If you go Bashal Rosh, it makes it easier. And once again, the Chazal have the right to pick any cutoff they want because they're making the meiser. So Rashi, Aslu Basar Shrasha, Shebishon Achas Musharesh Kol Asada. Then it's uniform because the whole field takes root at the same time. Sherebe Vasacha Zorinaisa. Just because you're harvesting it at different times, you're planting them at the same time. Umasher Perish Ilan, the kidney is for Yerek with your abundant. Since all these are with your abundant anyway, the Yecholis Biat Chachamim, the Kfay is man, Lefidaitam, Lechalechadechad. And they have the ability to choose how they want to cut up the meat. So they picked something that would be less confusing. Amalei Abaye, the Yitzbar, Geiranai Lasoichai, Menimtze Torah min HaChodesh Shabai ala Chodesh Shabai, min HaYoshin Shabai ala Yoshin Shabai. Why do Chazal have this problem that we're afraid that you're going to have some, if you go to Lakita, some will be before, some will be after, it's not a problem. Even if some is from before, some is after, if you mix it together well, we can say you have a uniform mixture. If you have a uniform mixture and you take off Meiser from the whole uniform mixture, we'll say that you're taking off uniformly from the Chodesh and from the Yoshin. So even though you don't have separate the Chodesh and the Yoshin, but together you'll be separating Chodesh and Yoshin from a mixture of Chodesh and Yoshin. Does that work? Does such a concept work? Dr. Gemara, it does work. Milai Tanya, didn't we learn? Rabbi Yosy ben Keeper Amar Mishum Rab Shimon Shazuri, Pula Mitri, Shazarai, Pula Mitri, that you planted, Lazara Mitzah, Shazari Lazara, you planted it not for the purposes of eating it as a vegetable, because then it would be Bashal Akita. Rather, you planted it for the purposes of getting its seeds so that you could plant it again. And Rashi tells us Pula Mitri, I'm on the second to the bottom of the skinny lines. Min kidneys pazuli, bedakun lizroyan liyerk ulazera. Sometimes people plant them to use as a vegetable, and sometimes you plant them to be able to get their seeds. If you're planting these things for a yerek, then it follows the rules of yerek, which is bashalakita. But if you're planting it just to eat the seeds, then there's kidneys halop, it'll have the status of kidneys, and it will follow the rule of Ashrasha, like we said. This person did plant it Lazera. The Hishrish Miktsasi Lefnei Rosh Hashana and Miktsasi Lachar Rosh Hashana. And he had a problem that some took root before, some took root after, so it's mixed. So what do you do? Hishrish Miktsasi Hishrish Lefnei Rosh Hashana and Miktsasi Hishrish Lachar Rosh Hashana. Ein Torah Minu Ma'ash Mizel Zeh. You cannot take truma from the parts that were mashrish before Rosh Hashana and those that were after. So you're stuck. How do you deal with this? You can't separate the two. They're all mixed together. So what is the best solution? You mix it all together really well. And if it's a mixture, then and then when you mix it all together, we'll assume that you're being mafish equal quantities of everything. Rashi says, you have to mix it really well. When you separated them, mix them together again. Don't bother about separating them. Mix them all together. The nimtza it will say that it's equally mixed, and it'll be considered yashin and chodesh. So oibezoi here to do the same thing. So why did they have a reason to go bashar ashrasha? They could have went bashar. Amalei, so you answered Shimon Shazuri Kamrit. You're asking me a kasha from Shimon Shazuri. Shimon Shazuri Savar Yesh Bila. Shimon Shazuri holds to this because he holds when you mix things together, you can mix them together very well, and we can assume that you're being mafish equally, proportionally from the new on the new and the old on the old. But the Rabbanon, we're not going with the sheet of Shimon Shazuri. We're going with the Rabbanon who holds Ein Bila. This mix doesn't work, and you can't be sure that you're going to be mafish Chodesh al Chodesh and from Yoshin al Yoshin. Zok Rashi yesh bila, yesh lismach ala bila loymar. You could rely on the mixing to say sheyesh mishneim b'seicha ma'aser l'v'yei cheshbon, that you'll have the equal proportions of ma'aser equal to the proportion of the new and old in the whole pile. Ein bila, ein tzayim kach. You can't rely on it. Sheyesh loymar le'nivel yof. Maybe it didn't get mixed well, and maybe v'ruba shel ma'aser is min hachodesh, a ruba min hayashin, which will not work. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani Amar Shmuel. Halacha Rabbi Yosy ben Keeper. The Allah of the Rabbi Yosy ben Keeper, Shama Mishum Rab Shimon Shazuri, who said in the name of Rab Shimon Shazuri that yesh bila, and in fact you could mix things together and they work. Correct the Gemara, Maska Flo Rab Zeir. Rab Zeir asked, Umi Amar Shmuel Achi? Did Shmuel agree that this bila works? Via Amar Shmuel L'choil Ein Bila Chutz Miyayin B'Shemen. Shmuel says I disagree with bila because I held it only applies to liquids. Liquids we could say will be completely equalized. But who said when it comes to grains, you could say the same thing? Zok Rashi, Chutz miyayin v'shemen, ha'ma'arv yayin chodesh ima yoshan, or shemen chodesh ima yoshan, then tarimu ma'aser mimenu. and we'll say v'yesh b'maser shneim l'pi hachesed. Shedavar lach milvol yafa. A liquid will mix together perfectly. Avol yavish, but dry grain ain't seimachin by alabila. You can't. So the problem is here. The problem is how could you say that Shmuel said Allah is like Yosy ben Kippur, Shimon Sazuri, who hold you do say bila, when Shmuel himself said you don't say bila. Dr. Gemara, you missed something. When Shmuel paskin like Shimon Sazuri, he's not paskin like Shimon Sazuri because of his reason. He's just agreeing with the halacha, but he comes to the conclusion of that halacha through a different path. Shmuel hakoil hoylech acher gemar pri. You're forgetting what Shmuel said that hakoil hoylech acher gemar pri, which would allow him to be maskim to the psak of Reb Shimon Sazuri, but not because of Reb Shimon Sazuri's reason. So what did Reb Shimon Sazuri say? You have certain things that were initials before and that they were initials after, and then you pick them all after, and since you don't know what's what, you mix them together. Well, Shmuel holds you go acher gemar pri. Doesn't matter when it was initials. It all depends on when you cut it down. So therefore, he doesn't have to come on to the bila. So he agrees with Reb Shimon Sazuri's psak that you could be Torah altogether, but he didn't reach there through the same avenue. So let's see the bottom Rashi. By kidneys, you're not following a Rosh, like Reb Shimon Sazuri himself says. I agree with this psak halacha that you could take the trumas and maishus from all of these fruits together after Hashana, but not because of his reason. Reb Shimon Sazuri time mishum bila. His reasoning was because of bila. The time of the Shmuel, he considers everything from the next year, because it all grew and completed after Rosh Hashanah. You need Shmuel to have said both. Hani tlas the Shmuel. Shmuel said three different halachas, and we need all of them expressed. A is halacha Reb Shimon Sazuri. He passed like Reb Shimon Sazuri. He also passed on the Chol and Bila. And he also passed him that Akoil Hoylech Acher Gemar Pri. All of these three halachas are very relevant. Why? If he would have just said halacha Shimon Sazuri to agree that you could be Torim and Maaser, all of these seeds together after Rosh Hashanah, Havamina, I would have thought for the wrong reason. You should do Kashavar Yesh Bila. I would have thought that Shmuel holds Yesh Bila, which in fact that's not the reason. The reason why he holds you can be Torim them all together is because he holds it all depends on when it ripens and when you cut it. That's why he had to speak out. Ein bila. Sure, I mask him to the psak of Reb Shimon Sazuri, but definitely I'm not following along with his reason. And if he would have just said l'chala and bila, hava mina karbanan. I would have thought maybe that he holds like the rabbanon. In fact, that you have to separate them. That you can't be mafresh them together. So he had to say that you can also be mafresh the maishus together. And if he only said those two halachas, then you'd have a steering Shmuel. Does he hold like Reb Shimon Sazuri or not? Which is the kasha that our Gemara had. And that's why he had to speak out again that which is the real reason why Shmuel holds that you can be mafresh the trumas and maishus on these things all together, and that is because the Gemara Pri all happened after Rosh Hashanah, so they're all from the new year. What if Shmuel just told us that? Maybe that would have taught us everything. Havamina, I would have thought, it even applies with Tvuv, which is not true. There it's when she views shlish. Kamash Malon, Nalacha, Reb Shimon Sazuri, B'mai Depalit. I'm only passing like Reb Shimon Sazuri on what he argues. Where is he arguing? By these grains and seeds. By those grains and seeds, it goes Basar, the Gemar Peri. But by Tfun Zaysim, Avada, it doesn't go Basar Gemar Peri, it goes Basar Hevir Shlish. He could have told us just these two things. A is that Hakolach Gemar Pri and B Allah Hashem Shazuri. Lachoil and B Alamali. Why did he have to speak out? Lakol and Bila, we would have had it all figured out. The Gemara, Hakamash Shalom, the reason why I want to tell you that is the Layayin B'Shem Yesh Bila. He was trying to say Lachol, only these items, these grains, only there is no Bila. But I want you to know, when it comes to liquids, I agree that things mix uniformly, things mix evenly, and there you could rely on the Bila. So everything Shmuel said was measured and important and required. Okay, I guess we could stop over here. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you.
Yeah, they just announced they're making a Farbrengen with Soy Shabbos in White Common.
Akiva is making a Farbrengen in his home. or maybe in a tent. But so Shabbos, everybody's invited to come, and it's Akiva's birthday. And what time is it starting? And what time is Mendel coming?
10:30.
Uh-huh.
And they're giving a free COVID shot. Free COVID shots, for whoever didn't get their shot yet. So-
Yeah, Mendel not only gives out COVID shots, Mendel gives out other shots too. Okay.